Hello, broadcast community. It is MJ Callaway here with your next episode of Bounce Up Broadcast. And I am thrilled to have my amazing co host, Jim Kunkle, with me. And then also, our special guest today is Dr. Rhonda. Now, you probably have seen some of Dr. Rhonda's comments over the past few episodes. So we are thrilled to bring her in. So, hello, you two.
Oh, thanks for having me on, MJ and Jim. Really excited to be here with you and talk about all things forgiveness related. I appreciate your content you put out that really helps build these skill sets that some of us are still working on in terms of being successful in both our personal life and our professional life. So look forward to spending some time with you in the audience.
It's great to have you.
It is, you're right, Jim. So for our viewers, Dr. Rhonda is coming from Arizona, and Jim and I are coming from Pittsburgh, where we are in the middle of an ice storm. So where in the world, before we kick off Forgiveness Take Two, where in the world are you coming from? Where are you tuning in from? We would love to be able to know. So share that with us in the comments. So one of the reasons why we decided to do Forgiveness Take Two is because there were so many comments last week, and we didn't feel we quite covered everything we could possibly cover under the topic of forgiveness. And more than likely, we could probably do a dozen episodes around forgiveness. So Jim, what is one of the things that you feel we hadn't covered last week that we could share with Dr. Rhonda and maybe dig into it?
Well, I think the title really sums it up where you're looking at being a superpower because, forgiveness is something that you really have to really give from the inner self and give it out to others. So it can take a big leap of faith. It can be very powerful for you to really get to that point. So I really do view it as a superpower, like if you were Superman or Batman or some other superhero character out there.
Good point. And hello to Kim there from Texas. So before the broadcast, Rhonda and I were talking about, and this comes to because Jim had just mentioned about internal, it's something internal. And Rhonda, you had mentioned, this is Heart Healthy Month. And when we're talking about forgiveness, it does impact our heart. So can you share a little bit about your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that forgiveness is about building a legacy of love, really, and showing love and compassion for not only ourselves, but all living beings, despite the challenges and struggles that we all face. And when we look at forgiveness from a loving kindness perspective, from our heart and our minds, and we know now with research that there's definitely a correlation of our gut and our heart and our mind, they all talk to each other, and that fuels our well-being. When we look at forgiveness from that component, it really does impact all areas of our well-being, our energy levels, how we respond to stress in our life, how we facilitate healing, how we relate to each other, despite all the realities of today's world, especially with, I would say, a lot of the negativity we see on the news and with social media. And it just constantly is fueling this kind of not so helpful vibe. So I think forgiveness allows us to resonate and rise and bounce up, as you would say, from a more healthy, helpful perspective. But I think it's something that we need to learn or we need to facilitate in our children and our everyday lives. And it's not necessarily something that we learn, right? Or that we really talk about. So it's something, I believe it's a habit that we can intentionally practice, and we can start with little forgiveness steps so that we can maybe eventually reach forgiveness for things that really were traumatizing in our life, and look at people in a more compassionate way that maybe have contributed to some anger and resentment in our lives. So it's our superpower, really.
Yeah, and we've
Definitely.
we're seeing examples when it comes to the lack of forgiveness, and a lot of times, what tends to happen is someone will make a statement or they'll say something. Maybe they post something on social media,
Mm.
and it really draws the fire on them. But there doesn't seem to be sometimes a path to redemption. We
Mm.
all are human. We all make mistakes, and we really need to have more forgiveness. And that's really my concern right now. I think we're lacking so much of
Mhm.
forgiveness right now. And it's in, like you said, Rhonda, the social media. It can be in business
Mhm.
environments. It can be in personal,
Mhm.
for your friends and family. And if we can really kind of say, hey, we all make mistakes,
Mhm.
offer that path of redemption, and I forgive you. And, I just was reading a story where um, a mother forgave a prisoner who
Mm.
had killed her son, and she came, it's years, 20, 30 years later,
Wow.
and she I forgive you. And sometimes it takes time, but
Mhm.
we always have to keep
Mhm.
that open to think about forgiveness and offering
Mhm.
that out to others.
Well, it takes courage and vulnerability, and sometimes when we're
Yes.
living in an experience where we feel threatened, like our natural inclination is to put up barriers to protect ourselves. And in doing so, we experience all these emotions that really are meant to protect us. But when we hold on to those emotions after the incident, that's where it really
Mhm.
starts to challenge our health and well-being. And if you think today, I mean, I've seen research that children as young as 6 years old are feeling so much anxiety,
Hmm.
and are engaging in
Mhm.
self-harm behaviors because they're being bullied, and just trying to teach them their value, a sense of self-worth, and then open up the conversations about maybe that person that is bullying you, probably there's something going on where they're hurting and they just don't know how to react to the hurt and the trauma that they're experiencing that could be generational, and maybe that can help facilitate some conversations, excuse me, while keeping justice in
Mhm.
mind. So that's important to talk about as well. So.
And going back to the baby steps. So in doing the research, one of the things that I had found was forgiveness actually takes emotional, so internal,
Mhm.
emotional, and external, the behavior. But it's going back to, the legacy and teaching our children. And we are not taught how to forgive.
Mhm.
I mean, it isn't like we're handed a book as we're growing up that says, step one, step two, step three in forgiveness. So, what would be the baby steps to take? And before you answer that, I want to give a shout out to whoever is the LinkedIn user from Pittsburgh, PA. Thank you so much for joining us. So, appreciate that. So, what are some baby steps? What are not only baby steps we can implement, but what can we teach the younger generation, children that are growing up and impacted by everything that is going on today? What can we do to teach them?
Well, I found that when I started in education, I worked with at-risk youth, kids in high school that were tossed out and kicked to the
Mhm.
curb. And one of the things that I found that was helpful in helping them deal with their emotions and their behavioral issues was just listening. So
Mhm.
being very present with each other and actively listening without judging is really an important way to help facilitate their learning aspects of forgiving someone despite whatever wrongs they've done, and
Mhm.
coming from a place of compassion and understanding that, again, we all make mistakes, hopefully
Mhm.
we learn from our mistakes and they're learning opportunities, but just coming from a place of love and compassion. So teaching that, and teaching our children how best to manage their emotions when they're starting to feel anger. Acknowledge the emotions. When you
Mm.
feel someone bullied you, acknowledge it. Yes, that was wrong. holding that person accountable, but then teaching them how to let those emotions go. And one of the things I think can be a beautiful practice is journaling. We hear journaling for so many types of a therapy to help people with so many different trauma experiences. Sometimes when you write things down that you're feeling, maybe that begins the process of you understanding your body and how you hold on to anger, frustration, and trauma, those somatic experiences. Like, wow, somebody will say to you, man, you look like you're angry all the time. And then, oh, maybe it was something somebody said to you like 10 minutes ago, but you're not even aware that you're holding on to that anger. And it's showing up, it's manifesting in your body and probably in how you're communicating with others. So I think being mindful, journaling, and even doing like body scans. So if you're noticing that your body's starting to change, your heart rate's starting to increase, like paying attention to what's happening, and what is in your control when that's happening, when somebody's approaching you in maybe not the most helpful way. How can you emotionally regulate yourself so you can make a cognitive decision based on all the things you know are right to do in the moment without those emotions taking over? So emotional regulation, I think, is a beautiful way to tap into forgiveness, if that answers your question.
It does. And opening up first with listening, because that enables the other person to share their side of the story, their perspective, their opinion.
Yeah.
Plus, also, it's a way for them to get the anger out and then acknowledging it. Because I found from my own life, until I have been able to work on whatever anger I have because of an unjust, until I work that out, I couldn't get to the part of forgiving. So good points there.
MJ, let me bring up this comment from Carl Davenport.
Absolutely.
There are many examples in history of dehumanization leading to genocide. Any comments on how to turn this tide that in today, a more secular society, if I turn into a bug, I don't need to forgive you. I like that part. But we're looking at dehumanization. I mean, that does still go on today, and history is so full of dehumanization that's led to terrible, terrible genocides and other types of cruelty to mankind. Any recommendations or ways to kind of address that as a society?
I would go back to the importance of teaching our youth, teaching our children love and kindness. And, I can't cite off the top of my head some of the research I've read about this from different areas that are experiencing conflict still to this day. There's still hope and sunshine in these areas where mothers and fathers are trying to facilitate love and kindness and compassion in areas where if they walk out the street, that might be their last day. I mean, it's really hard, on a global level to think about this, but I think the more we teach forgiveness early on in life, I think the easier that is going to be to change hearts. I mean, we see that already in our younger population. They're more kind, they're more compassionate. I mean, I can remember like during my upbringing, we're all approximately the same generation, like, do unto others as they do unto you.
Yeah.
And there's a positive side and then a negative side to that. So it's like, how are we best facilitating how best to treat each other's as unique individuals with certain challenges while holding each other accountable, but not blaming and shaming and continuing this resentful cycle. But there are angels, and then there are other spirits that are just going to challenge us. So the stronger we are as a people, as a humanity, as a global society, and I think that's actually one of the things that can be helpful is technology, because now more people can also voice the more positive side of, not judging, not discriminating, inclusion, diversity. We're more diverse as a people. So these groups that we've so been programmed to have belief systems in, like some of those barriers are coming down where we're more open to different religions coming together, people of
Yeah.
different colors. Like that wasn't the case 50 years ago. I mean, I come from a strong Italian background, and I remember my grandma asking me, like, who are you dating? And like there was a judgment there. So the more that we break down the stereotypes of division, I think that's where the healing is going to happen.
I also too I went to school in the 70s, 80s, and then I went to college and then university. And the thing that in history classes, we never really talked about some of these dark moments in history. And I think that if they get forgotten or not known, that they can be repeatable because you learn, and it's terrible that these events have to happen, but you learn so much about what needs to be done, and again talking about forgiveness and understanding and just realizing that we're all human. We might have different beliefs and we might look different, but we're all the same inside. And I think that education too is something that's important. The good thing with the internet is you can look a lot up on a lot of these things, but also too you can find useful information, but you can also sometimes find contrary opinions also too on the internet. So that all has to be taken with a grain of salt.
Well, and learning too from our past. We're learning. We can learn so much about the future by learning from the past and not making those same mistakes. Those life lessons. So.
Yeah. Another comment here was,
Sure.
early during the pandemic, and still today, I adopted the mindset that I would forgive everyone by giving them a COVID pass. And the pandemic, when you really think about it, it forced us to be more virtual. It did definitely intensify people online and social media and other ways to really do business, interact with each other. And so, that opened up an area too where I think when we're face to face, we treat each other differently than when we're hiding behind the internet.
Oh, definitely.
And Twitter is an excellent example of that, where you get some vitriol and hatred and terrible things come out of Twitter. But then also too, I think there's some good elements of social media, but I do prefer that face-to-face interaction because you really get to have that connection with the people you're talking with or you're meeting or you're being introduced to. And I think that's hopefully as we start to get beyond this, as we get back out there more and gripping and grinning and going out and doing social things together.
Well, and it also goes back to what Rhonda said earlier, do unto others as you want them to do to you.
That golden rule. Yeah.
That golden rule, definitely. So before you post anything, and also thinking about gratitude and kindness, all of that comes into forgiveness, and then looking at the other person and stepping into their shoes, because we really don't know. Rhonda mentioned, someone is hurting. They are hurting. So why are they hurting? And how can we look at forgiveness for them? And forgiveness doesn't mean we forget. Well, I want to pose it as a different way. We say forget, but it doesn't. We can forgive and yet protect ourselves.
Yes.
We can remember what happened as long as we protect ourselves. And I'd rather think of it as protecting oneself when we forgive, rather than I'm going to forget what happened.
I agree. And I also look at forgiveness as leaving a legacy of love. And that's what I want to try to teach my daughter. I mean, MJ, some of my background, came from a very hostile domestic environment, domestic violence environment. And, as you talked about, like my daughter's father, drunk, alcoholic, came from a cycle of abuse, and he just repeated those same behaviors. And I really felt it important to protect us. And for 13 years, that was definitely a struggle. But I still came from a heart of compassion and love, where I wanted her to still know him, but know him as a man who had been raised in an environment that was not healthy. And he did not have the coping skills to handle his emotions, or didn't even know how to love himself, let alone somebody else. So, and I wanted to role model for her like holding on to that anger and anxiety really wasn't serving me well, and then in turn wasn't serving how I was parenting her well.
Right.
So I mean, but it took, a good 10 years before I was able to enter that healthier mindset space with her, because of the threat that I was feeling and she was feeling. But I can distinctly remember coming out of the courts when she was 13 and looking at him in a completely new set of eyes, like looking at him as the soul who had just been beaten down, and he just didn't know how to handle his anger and his emotions. And now while I felt protected, and had removed myself from that environment, there was still some empathy for him. And I wanted to give him that second, third, fourth, fifth chance to try again to be a more kinder human. And that means hope. So I think forgiveness brings about feelings of hope as well, which can be super powerful.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. And there are times too where he didn't know how to break the pattern. He
Yes.
was in a pattern, didn't know how to break it. In my book, Bounce Up, I interviewed a gentleman named Phil Cohen. And Phil Cohen grew up in a similar situation he was abused and so forth. And he eventually got out of that pattern. And what he did was, when he started his company and he started to hire others, employees, he looked at other people, he said, like himself, who had been traumatized, who had gone through some type of trauma, because his goal was to build stronger families, to give his employees that foundation where they could break that pattern, and they could, it's a fabulous story of what he has been able to do. But he was able to break that pattern and then teach others how to break the pattern by investing in them and giving them the education. So,
Very good.
Jim, I would say that ties into the question that you had earlier up from the gentleman, like how do we change this global epidemic of violence? I think it's through every single one of us doing our little part in our little circle that eventually in time can heal society.
and it starts with us, and then one person. Who's the next person that you can help? Is it, if you don't have family, is it a neighbor? Is it a coworker? Is it a colleague? Someone. But starting with us, and then when we are able to do it to the next person, it just creates that ripple effect, that ripple impact.
Yeah, and I would say in the workplace, if you have a conversation with your coworkers that didn't go so well, and you know it in your gut that they're probably not feeling so good. I wasn't so respectful in that conversation. Picking up the phone and just reconnecting and say, yo, I'm sorry. However you want to express yourself, but again, allowing yourself to be vulnerable, and going back with an open heart.
Yeah. Taking coffee and saying, okay, thank you so much for your patience with me, because I know I wasn't nice, or I wasn't whatever. So, and I like to use the thank you rather than the I'm sorry. I am sorry, but I'd rather say thank you, because it was a gift that they gave us grace. Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you for giving me grace. Thank you for, whatever it was. I feel it's a more positive way of having, that remorse. So, and I want to say thank you, Brian, for being the president of my fan club. So Brian is he runs a local chamber here, and he is awesome with his connection with others. So thank you so much.
We got another comment here from Carl. This is going to be a big one, so read this through. Yeah, where he's saying he doesn't see more forgiveness in today's world. I see much less of a wider divide, especially with the USA. So I applaud all the efforts to forgive. And what Carl's saying is so true. I think the other thing too with today's world is that everything is so instantaneous. If someone says something that is not
Yes.
proper, it gets amplified quickly,
Mhm.
and then it runs through all the social media. It's on the news. It's on everyone's feed when they're looking at their phone or they're on their tablet, and so it's more in our face. I remember I had a great uncle who served over in Europe during World War II, and the things that he's seen. He told me when they rolled into
Mm.
Germany, he's seen camps, and he was in a tank, but he never knew or expected to see what he saw, and it totally changed him. So.
Mm. Well, if you think, my father was served in Vietnam, and he came back a changed man.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And I think that was, he didn't know how to deal with the emotions, and he went and served our country and watched all of his platoon killed, and he
Hmm.
was the last survivor. And I mean, my relatives all told me, like, he was such a kind and compassionate man before the war, and he never said I love you. He was not a warm human. He provided for us, but I think, you know in forgiving him in my adulthood, it brought out his ability. I think it helped facilitate him to be able to forgive himself. And I watch him now, and my
Hmm.
heart just is ecstatic with joy and love to see how his life has changed, and during his last days, again, leaving a legacy of love. I'm so thankful that I was able to forgive him, while not everyone, maybe has had the same experience. But just picture, my last breath, his last breath, how much more beautiful that transformation to whatever next is going to be, and how we're going to leave this earth in a better place, just because we healed those wounds that were really deep. And for some people, it's really hard to get to. And I think without the act of forgiveness, the cycles are just going to continue. So,
So as we're coming up to our time here, so for the someone who is struggling to forgive, whether to forgive themselves or whether to forgive someone else, and sometimes it starts with forgiving yourself.
mhm.
What is something they can do? We know that listening to someone, but what's their first step? So are they to reach out to someone? Like, what do they need to do as their first step?
Well, there is such a thing as forgiveness therapy. So I would definitely recommend that, through your workplace. Even reach out to your EAP.
Okay.
I'm very, I'm very mindful of that with my team. When I hear that there's some struggles going on in their personal life that may be impacting their professional life, I encourage them to use their EAP. I model, and I also explain my experiences using AAP, or reach out to a
Mhm.
counsel or a clergy member or a best friend, a trusted resource. MJ, you always talk about that team that you
Yes.
build. Reach out to someone on your team and just have someone listen to your concerns and how you're struggling. And then I would say, for the rest of us, is understand that forgiveness, someone else forgiving an injustice, that's not our place to do. That's each person, each individual, when they're ready. And the hopes
Mhm.
are that they can get to that space. And if not, that's not for us to judge or blame.
And then one other question, is there a book that you would recommend?
Oh, I
I know I
think
just put you on the spot.
I believe there's a book called The Power of Forgiveness, by a professor in Wisconsin. His name is escaping me right now, but I can definitely send you that information. He's studied forgiveness for over the past 25 years. He actually facilitates forgiveness learning for kids all throughout the
Mm.
world.
Mm.
So when we're talking about the global process of healing, he's definitely doing the work, and like-minded individuals. So that would be my recommendation. I wish I want to say Springer, but that's probably the show that I'm thinking of. That's not the healthy one to watch.
That's okay. So yes, you can send it to me, or you can even post it in the
Okay,
comments, so when people
sure.
are watching the replay. So, all right, Rhonda, how can someone get a hold of you?
You can reach me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on there, as you know, MJ.
Yes.
You can also, I have a website, Planting Seeds for Healthy, Happy Living. You can reach me there or email me at, just call me Rhonda, r.bompensa46@gmail.com, or, just anywhere on social media. Pretty much I'm in that space, all wellness related.
Thank you so much. And Jim, I know you were close to hitting 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. So where do you stand on that, and how can people subscribe?
Well, if you search Jim Kunkle on YouTube, you can find my content there. And please, if you have a Google account, please become a subscriber of my channel. Get me to 1,000, and then as I start to build other type of hours of content, I'll start to be able to elevate that channel into the next tier. So I'm really looking forward to that. And you can always catch the broadcast every Wednesday. It does broadcast here on LinkedIn, my YouTube channel, and also Facebook. And it's called Build Out with Jim Kunkle. And we have business topics and a lot of great conversation and fun times.
Great. So, and Jim is the behind the scenes. He does all of the technical stuff here for the Bounce Up broadcast. So we appreciate his talents. And remember, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel at MJ Callaway. And if you are looking for any type of free resources around communication, around bouncing up, around flipping adversity to positivity, go ahead and see my website, mjcallaway.com/free downloads. So you can get all those resources there. So until next time, remember to make it a bounce up day.
Yay.
Goodbye.
Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.